The title is the topic. Today I'm responding to a video, How to Be a Feminist, posted on the Feminist Frequency YouTube channel.
I had to learn how to be a feminist.
So let's see what you have to tell us.
So throughout high school and college, I was involved with clubs, organizing against wars in the Middle East, raising awareness about climate change, and demanding gay and lesbian rights. So I was heavily involved in social justice causes, but I still didn't call myself a feminist.
You fought for social justice causes without calling yourself a feminist. What you just said is you don't need the title to fight for those causes.
At the time, I may have even uttered the dreaded phrase, "I believe in equality, but I'm not a feminist." Yeah, not a high point in my life.
And why would you avoid calling yourself a feminist?
But I'm not really here to discuss the overly sexualized adolescent male fantasy that Bayonetta is, because it's basically a choose-your-own patriarchal adventure porno fantasy.
Patriarchal behavior.
And a patriarchy, which is the obsession with control.
Patriarchal objectification.
A set of patriarchal norms. But since we live in a male-dominated, male-centered society, is because we live in a male-centered society.
Snyder is nothing but a parasite trying to leech off the gains of feminism to satisfy his own personal pornographic adolescent boy fantasies, which just serves as another example of the male-driven backlash against women. Sucker Punch is nothing more than a steaming pile of maggot-filled, festering, misogynist crap trying to masquerade as female empowerment.
The way feminists like you present yourself is a large part of the reason other women don't like calling themselves feminists. A lot of what I've seen from you is a mindset where you get triggered by anything you deem unacceptable, and then legions of your followers rally together to go after whoever or whatever you deem needs going after. Not all women agree with you, yet because you call yourself a feminist, you think what you do is acceptable because you do it in the name of feminism.
So, like most people who grew up immersed in the neoliberal ideology of the West, I saw the world largely as a series of individuals making their own personal individual choices.
So that is how you saw the world, as individuals making their own choices.
And here I was, a young woman making my own personal choices about what to wear, what to buy, what to study, and what I wanted to do every day.
And you did just that. You made your own choices based on what you wanted to do. There isn't much to indicate that being a woman held you back, as you said you had the freedom to do what you wanted.
Within that narrow individualistic framework, feminism seemed like a relic of the distant past.
Maybe that's because you just said you had all the freedoms to do what you want.
And here I was, a young woman making my own personal choices about what to wear, what to buy, what to study, and what I wanted to do every day.
The fact you had all those freedoms is probably why you didn't call yourself a feminist earlier in your life. The thing feminists like you don't seem to understand is you were born into your rights. Any woman from your generation in this country is privileged compared to your predecessors who had to actually fight for the rights you just said you had. Women like you have it so good in our culture and don't even comprehend this because you are privileged. There may still be some inequalities, but feminists like you also have this mentality of looking for things to fight for, even if they are discredited or debatable.
Back then, I thought sexism basically boiled down to a few bad apples with misguided personal beliefs born out of ignorance or overt hatred.
Back then, you based it on your life experience. You looked at the world the way it treated you, and you probably judged the problems from your perception. The problem with your branch of feminism is how you learn about other problems. You learn it from others that tell you how to think, and you eventually get to the point where you can't think for yourself. There are several feminist arguments that have been either discredited or debated, and it doesn't matter. You've been taught to fight for some causes that are not worth the time or effort.
So it wasn't until I was in my early to mid-20s that I began to realize my impression of feminism had been completely wrong.
Feminism is about equal rights. Some current branches of feminism are about an ideology that doesn't care about facts. It is possible you had the right idea when you were younger and learned an ideology that tells you not to accept facts for what they are. Your videos have been discredited. They have more flaws than I care to mention, yet you continue to push them nonetheless in a quest for equal representation of women in video games.
With the help of some amazing mentors.
If Jonathan McIntosh is one of your amazing mentors, I'm not impressed with him. The dude has no issues with lying to and manipulating people.
And by reading a lot of feminist writing, especially the words of women of color and queer women from around the world,
When you start talking about colored women and queer people, you're starting to go into issues that are not just female related and other issues that are more complicated than just feminism, which is probably part of the reason you didn't call yourself a feminist when you were younger. It is not required to be a feminist to fight for everything under the sun. Another issue that arises is when you start learning about ideological causes, whether they are from one side of the debate or the other side, some people tend to only learn from those on their side. Several people on your side follow each other, reference the same authors, and suggest the same resources. On top of that, any side of the debate has extremists in it, both in their lines of thinking and how they act. Even if some of the things you fight for are justifiable, it does not always justify the methods used. And one more issue with ideological discussion is the inability for people on either side of the debate to admit when they're wrong, when rock-solid facts refute their claims.
I learned to see through a sociological lens and understand the world as it really exists, as a series of intersecting social systems.
When you view things through a lens, you can focus on specific issues. The problem with feminists like you is you only view it through a lens and refuse to see anything outside of your line of vision. In some cases, you use your lens to block out the rest of the world and don't listen to what other people are telling you. Even when presented with rock-solid facts that challenge or discredit your arguments, you choose to keep fighting anyways.
Once you have a systemic and institutional framework, you see how oppression manifests in many subtle ways under the systems of what Bell Hooks calls white supremacist capitalist patriarchy.
White supremacist patriarchy. The white part indicates it is a racial issue, not a feminist issue. The patriarchy issue is debatable. You said earlier you didn't have any issues doing what you wanted with your life. Then after you learn from others who told you these problems exist, you see problems that may in fact be non-issues. Nothing limited your freedom till others convinced you that you didn't have as much as you thought you did. It's also true that not every colored person views society the same way. Some see it differently, and others have a more balanced approach to the problems. When people like you come along, I see a severe lack of balance in your approach. When you push your line of thinking with lies and manipulation, I don't see an approach I agree with, nor one I'd want to be a part of.
So not only did I have to learn how to be a feminist, I also had to learn how to be a feminist who understands systems.
You are also a feminist who spreads lies and misinformation in your videos.
Studied extensively.
After reviewing your videos, I have that much more trouble trusting what you say. When the foundation for your celebrity status, where you are becoming more and more of a known name, is founded on lies and misinformation, it does more to hurt your credibility than to help it in my eyes. The only people who do not have issues with your credibility are those who are sympathetic to you due to the harassment narrative. That is manipulating people to accept your work, even though your work has issues that should be addressed.
I had to learn how systems of oppression are maintained by our participation in them, but they're also self-perpetuating via paths of least resistance, and as such, are larger than any one person's choices.
You criticize these systems, but choose to participate in them anyways. Your hair, makeup, and jewelry are typically female traits. Isn't it possible some of these systems develop based on what women like and how they like to be treated, as opposed to a patriarchal system that tells you what to do? You already said you had freedom to do as you pleased when you were younger, just as you choose to fight the patriarchy in a system that allows you to fight patriarchy. If it's patriarchy that causes some of these problems, yet women actively participate anyways, isn't it possible it evolved this way in part due to the choices of women and not just that of men? Then feminists like you tell men and women they are part of the problem, when it may in fact be feminists like you who are part of the problem.
Okay, so this is the part where I say things that may ruffle some feathers, but I think it's a critical discussion to have.
So let's have it then.
So over the past few years, I've become increasingly worried about the direction mainstream internet feminism appears to be headed, at least in the West.
You should be worried.
But I'm not really here to discuss the overly sexualized adolescent male fantasy that Bayonetta is, because it's basically a choose-your-own patriarchal adventure porno fantasy.
Snyder is nothing but a parasite trying to leech off the gains of feminism to satisfy his own personal pornographic adolescent boy fantasies, which just serves as another example of the male-driven backlash against women.
Because feminists like you are part of the problem, not the solution. You give your movement a toxic image. There are people who despise you, and not because you're a feminist, it's because of how you act and what you say. Your video game videos are full of lies and manipulation, and you are a big name in pop culture critique when it comes to the feminist movement.
Unfortunately, many contemporary discourses in and around feminism tend to emphasize a form of hyper-individualism, which is informed by that neoliberal worldview.
There is no discourse. You shut down discussion. You are meticulous in who you do and don't talk to. And when someone does challenge you, you almost always reword it so you are right no matter what. You can be caught in the most uncomfortable situation and you always manage to word it so you are right no matter what. You can't just simply say you are wrong about something, and you lack the ability to find a middle ground with people who disagree with you.
More and more I hear variations on this idea that anything that any woman personally chooses to do is a feminist act. This attitude is often referred to as choice feminism.
Choosing to do something is freedom. If you have a choice, then the arguments for equal rights are less and less compelling when you look at the big picture. What I'm getting at is even if there are inequalities, it may not be as big picture or systemic as you lead others to believe.
Choice feminism posits that each individual woman determines what is empowering for herself, which might sound good on the surface, but this concept risks obscuring the bigger picture and larger fundamental goals of the movement by focusing on individual women with a very narrow individual notion of empowerment.
Empowerment is also an issue of freedom of choice. If a feminist like you tells other women what is or is not acceptable, then that becomes a reality in their mind. It has never been proven that there are long-term negative side effects from overly sexualized characters in video games, but you've been beating that drum for so long that people now believe it, even though it is not factually accurate. You do more harm to people than good by convincing them to believe things that are not true, and you use the feminist title to push lies and misinformation onto others.
It erases the reality that some choices that women make have an enormous negative impact on other women's lives.
The choices you're making to educate others are having an enormously negative effect on the video game industry and its culture. You are a large part of the problem right now, and it's not because you are a feminist, it's because you are pushing lies and misinformation onto others through your ideological video series that is not founded on rock-solid facts, but rather on manipulative language that is designed to convince us of things that are not as bad as you claim, and in some cases that are not true.
So it's not enough to feel personally empowered or be personally successful within the oppressive framework of the current system. Even if an individual woman can make patriarchy work for her, it's still a losing game for the rest of the women on the planet.
The rest of the women on the planet? You have freedoms that many women on this planet don't have. You are privileged and don't know how good you really have it. And talking about the world's problems as a whole does not refute the fact you have it better than a lot of women since you live in this country. And even if you want to make the argument that our society oppresses certain people in our country, it does not change the fact that in some cases you use lies and manipulation to push some of your agendas, and there are people who would disagree with you on several of the claims people like you make about our society.
The fact of the matter is that some choices have ramifications beyond ourselves and reinforce harmful patriarchal ideas about women as a group and about women's bodies and our wider shared culture.
You are a feminist with an ideology that tells her not to accept facts when they are presented. You are the one who can't see reality for what it is because you see the world for what your ideology tells you to see. There are plenty of women who disagree with you, but you would never listen to them because in your mind, you are right and they are wrong.
And because of how systems of oppression intersect and compound one another, it's women of color, indigenous women, women living in the global south, women with disabilities, queer women, and trans women who bear the brunt of these ramifications.
You just put a spotlight on specific issues. Some may be debatable, but those issues need to be addressed individually. We had a civil rights movement and women's suffrage in this country. That is more than some other countries can say. You are one woman trying to represent everyone, but the reality is you don't have discussions with people outside of your own line of thinking. You will always be pushing for what you want without any thought or regards to how others feel on the situation. You should be fighting on behalf of all women. Instead, you fight on behalf of yourself and only those who share your line of thinking.
Choice feminism also obscures the fact that women don't have a real choice. We have a very narrow set of predetermined choices within patriarchy.
You already said when you were younger, you did what you wanted to do.
And here I was, a young woman, making my own personal choices about what to wear, what to buy, what to study, and what I wanted to do every day.
Now you are saying you have limited choices within patriarchy. I don't think your freedoms are the issue. I think your ideology is.
Women can choose from a pre-approved palette, but we cannot meaningfully choose liberation.
Feminist. Advocating social, political, legal, and economic rights for women equal to those of men. Social, political, legal, and economic rights. Which specific rights are you currently lacking, and how bad is it for you? Most of your liberation was done before you were born. You are privileged and don't even know it because you were born into it.
We cannot choose a way out from our constraints, at least not without ending these oppressive systems that limit our options.
What options are limited? You just said a lot about how limited your options are, but never specified what it was you couldn't do.
So when we talk about free choice in today's world, we're really talking about a very narrow spectrum of choices that are amenable to patriarchy.
How are you limited in choices? You keep implying it, but don't specify it.
So, when we talk about how to be a feminist, for me, that means being committed to something much larger than ourselves.
For me?
For me,
as in how you learn to be a feminist from your mentors.
It's understanding what role you play in our collective movements for liberation. It's re-examining our desires and interests and understanding how those are often shared by how they're often shaped, maybe shared, who knows, by capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy.
Yet you haven't told us how you are truly limited by this implied oppressive system. From what I've seen, the only freedoms you have sacrificed are due to what your ideology tells you is unacceptable. Your branch of feminism restricts freedom because you choose not to partake in aspects of society that are acceptable by many other women. Some branches of modern feminism don't give you more freedom, they take it away by claiming certain things reinforce regressive notions about women, or it is actively participating in patriarchy.
It's understanding our own intersections of privilege and oppression and how that will fundamentally change our behaviors and attitudes and values.
What changed your behaviors and attitudes is an extreme ideology that has made you very unpopular with many people, not because you are a feminist, but because of how you act.
It's realizing that being a feminist is a lifelong learning endeavor, and that we will make some mistakes on the way, and we should be compassionate to ourselves when that happens.
Yet you refuse to admit to the mistakes you've made. An ideology that teaches you not to own up to your own problems is not worth having. Yet you spend your life running around teaching it to others regardless.
It's realizing that others will make mistakes and we should extend that compassion to them as well.
What some people on your side do when they disagree with what someone said or did is not to extend compassion, it is to level hate campaigns that hurt the image of the intended target in the public eye. Feminists like you try to force people to conform even if they don't want to. And in some cases, the offenders did nothing more than use their freedom of expression and speech. Your brand of feminism does not give people more freedom, it takes freedom away.
Feminism is not about striving for perfection, it's about striving for justice.
There is no justice in spreading lies and manipulating people. There is no justice in leveling hate campaigns. There is no justice in refusing to accept rock-solid facts because it disagrees with your ideological outlook on life. Some modern feminists use unjustifiable methods to push for unnecessary changes.
We are all connected. We are all bound together under the oppression of patriarchy, and as such, our personal actions or inactions do have a harmful effect on other women.
The actions of some modern feminists do have negative effects on both men and women. There are harmful effects to telling women and men they are defective for acting naturally. You convince people they should be happy by not being themselves. I would rather have solutions that make everyone equal and tell people it is okay to be themselves, whether they are normal or different, but your solutions want to force everyone to conform to what you consider acceptable, and you do this in part with lies and manipulation.
Especially those from the most marginalized communities.
Then those are the people you should be focusing on. In fact, if you use less lies and manipulation, I would be more inclined to listen and believe. But when I find so much lies and manipulation on your part, I'm more inclined to question and doubt. You do more harm than good to the causes you want to fight for with your methods, and you have issues with admitting when you're wrong, which makes it frustrating to tell the legitimate issues from the bogus ones, and makes it tough to highlight where resources and time should actually be spent. Your methods want to take a sledgehammer to everything when it may not be necessary to take everything to that extreme.
I realize this isn't a popular thing to say, but I can't say it apparently. That's how bad it is. No. But feel good personal empowerment is not how to be a feminist.
I would also say that lying and manipulating are not how to be a feminist. People like you hide behind the name of feminism so you can justify anything you do, anything you fight for, and any method you use to instill change.
In order to be a feminist, we have a responsibility beyond ourselves. We have a responsibility to each other, and we have a responsibility to work for the collective liberation of all women.
The collective liberation of all women should be accomplished by listening to all women, looking at all the facts, and accounting for all the factors. Your idea of liberation involves living inside an echo chamber, ignoring facts that challenge your claims, and ignoring factors that do not suit your ideological outlook.